Looks can be deceiving, which is why it is important to be mindful to who you share your life or information with. I'm going to be covering a woman named Juana Barraza, which is one of the most mind-blowing documentaries that I've ever explored. And without further ado, let's jump into it. In 1990, the streets of Mexico City became more dangerous than usual. A serial killer had been targeting 60-year-old women. Juana Barraza was in her 60s, which also made her a target. However, she was not worried in the least. Juana Barraza was a wrestler, and a very good one, which is one of the reasons she had no reason to fear this killer. In the wrestling ring, she went by the name the Silent Lady. She wore a mask covering her face when she wrestled. Little did anyone know, behind the mask was a dark secret. She didn't fear the killer, because she was in fact the killer. The police suspected the killer to be a strong man. Never did they think the killer being an older woman in her 60s. Aside from wrestling at night, she was the mother of 4 kids by day, showing a gentle side to her children. Little did they know their mother had a dark secret and a very troubled past. Juana Barraza Samperio was born in Epazoyucan, Hidalgo, a rural area north of Mexico City. Barraza's mother, Justa Samperio, was an alcoholic who reportedly exchanged her for 3 beers to a man who repeatedly raped her in his care, and by whom she became pregnant with a son. Her son died from injuries sustained in a mugging. Barraza became even more troubled, and during this time she began to blame her mother for the way her life turned out. She was also unable to confront her mother or take her frustration out on her because her mother was no longer amongst the living. Unable to confront the woman who she believed ruined her life, she targeted older women resembling her. All of Barraza's victims were women aged 60 or over, many of whom lived alone. Barraza bludgeoned or strangled them before robbing them. Bernardo Batiz, the chief prosecutor in Mexico City, initially profiled the killer as having a brilliant mind, being quite clever and careful, and suggested that the killer probably struck after gaining the trust of the intended victim. Investigating officers suspected that the killer posed as a government official, offering victims the chance to sign up for welfare programs. The search for Barraza was complicated by conflicting evidence. At one point, the police hypothesized that 2 killers might be involved. An odd coincidence also distracted the investigation. At least 3 of Barraza's victims owned a print of an 18th century painting by French artist Jean-Baptiste Greuze, Boy in a Red Waistcoat. The authorities believed that Juana Barraza was a psychopath who felt no remorse. Furthermore, Barraza associated her elderly victims with her mother and believed that she was helping society by killing them. In order to gain the trust of her victims, Barraza posed as a government official who worked in social welfare. The authorities were heavily criticized by the media for dismissing evidence that a serial killer was at work in Mexico City as merely media sensationalism as late as the summer of 2005. Soon after setting an investigation in motion, the police incurred further criticism by launching what one journalist described as a ham-fisted and unproductive swoop on Mexico City's transvestite prostitutes. By November 2005, the Mexican authorities were reporting witness statements to the effect that the killer wore women's clothing to gain access to the victims' apartments. In one case, a large woman in a red blouse was seen leaving the home of a murdered woman. 2 months later, police began checking the fingerprints of bodies in the city's morgues in the apparent belief that Mataviejitas might have committed suicide. A major breakthrough in the case occurred in January 2006 when a suspect was arrested fleeing from the home of the serial killer's latest victim, Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, who lived in the Venustiano Carranza borough of Mexico City. Alfaro, 82, had been strangled with a stethoscope. To the surprise of many Mexicans who had supposed the killer to be male, the suspect detained was Juana Barraza, a female wrestler known professionally as the Silent Lady. Witnesses at previous murder scenes had described a masculine-looking woman, and police had previously looked for a transgender person, although they later admitted that the former wrestler resembled composite images of the suspect. Barraza closely resembled a model of the killer's features, which showed La Mataviejitas with close-cropped hair dyed blonde and a facial mole, and was carrying a stethoscope, pension forms, and a card identifying her as a social worker when she was detained. Mexico City prosecutors said fingerprint evidence linked Barraza to at least 10 murders of the as many as 40 murders attributed to the killer. The wrestler is said to have confessed to murdering Alfaro and 3 other women, but denied involvement in all other killings. She told reporters that she strangled Alfaro after a dispute over pay for Barraza's maid services. Barraza was tried in the spring of 2008, the prosecution alleging she had been responsible for as many as 40 deaths. She admitted to 1 murder, that of Alfaro, and told the police her motive was lingering resentment regarding her own mother's treatment of her. In March, she was found guilty on 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary, including 11 separate counts of murder. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Since sentences imposed in Mexican courts are generally served concurrently, but the maximum sentence under Mexican law is 60 years, she will most likely serve the full sentence in prison. While in prison, Juana Barraza has been working as a gym instructor and selling tacos to support her family. According to news reports, Juana also got married and divorced while serving her sentence. Honestly, I think the people she married while incarcerated are nuts. I wouldn't touch her with a 10-foot pole, and I also wouldn't eat a single damn taco made from her. Even though she strangled or beat someone to death, I wouldn't put it past her that she might poison someone. She was given 1 billion sentences for her crimes, so naturally, it would be fair to treat her as a human? Hell no. I get she has a horrible upbringing, but her victims shouldn't have to pay the price. I think wrestling could have been a good anger release, but I guess it wasn't enough. Later on, she was portrayed in a TV series called Mujer, Casos de la Vida Real, in the early 2000s. Mexican producer Pedro Torres brought the story to television on an episode of the 2010 Mexican television series Mujeres Asesinas 3 that was produced by Televisa and Univision. The episode is called Maggie Pensionada, starring the Mexican actress Leticia Perdigon as Maggie and Irma Lozano, Ana Luisa Pelufo, and Lourdes Canle as victims. Barraza was highlighted in the documentary Instinto Asesino, which aired on Discovery en Español in 2010. The episode was entitled La Mataviejitas. Juana Barraza was also highlighted on the show La Historia Detrás del Mito. The episode was also entitled La Mataviejitas. Juana Barraza was featured on the 478th episode of The Last Podcast on the Left. The case was the subject of a 2023 documentary film, The Lady of Silence, The Mataviejitas Murders, on Netflix. Some sources gave the film mixed reviews, with Decider saying it offers the best and worst of the true crime doc genre and is occasionally lascivious, having some fat to be trimmed, and ultimately saying it too frequently reeks of crass exploitation and recommending its readers to skip it. Decider particularly took issue with footage of Barraza using a necktie and a member of her legal team posing as a pretended victim to demonstrate how she committed the stranglings, saying the footage is beyond gruesome, not to mention tasteless, and reeks of lionization and morbid fascination. However, Rolling Stone said the film transcends its subgenre and walks a fine line between observing the serious and pointing out the ridiculous, and concluding that it may be the year's best true crime doc. It's so ironic. She was a loser at life, in my opinion, with the opportunity to be a great wrestler, but now she's more famous than she ever was as a wrestler. Hello, everyone. As a bonus to the previous video, I'm going to share another case that I've recently read. The documentary was short, but I found it very interesting. Well, the twist of fate in particular. This is the case of a greedy old bat named Rowena Ledbetter. Let's get to it. Rowena Ledbetter was a 70-year-old nurse from Waco, Texas, who married 7 times. She met a man named Herman Wilson. She later claimed to have fell in love with Herman. However, Herman's family, mainly his nieces, had their doubts. None of them trusted Rowena and felt she was after his money. Upon doing some digging on Rowena, they discovered the divorces ended tragically. Not too long after that, Herman himself had a stroke and was sent to the hospital. The doctors treated his stroke as old age. Soon after that, Rowena claiming to be concerned for his well-being. She had him add her to his will. I honestly don't see how that's caring for him, but nevertheless, she was added to the will. Afterwards, Herman makes a full recovery, but his nieces were still concerned. They tried to warn Herman, believing she was the reason why he fell ill. Furthermore, Rowena was found to be holding more deadly secrets. Not only did her late husbands die, she was still married to husband number 7. Herman never wavered. He figured at her age, she's about to have skeletons. Alarms went off once more once the family witnessed Rowena reading the will from cover to cover to ensure her name was in the will intact. 48 hours after her name was added into the will, she came over for breakfast and made Herman biscuits and gravy. Herman immediately fell to the ground choking after eating the meal. Herman finally realized what his nieces tried to warn him about was real. On his way to the hospital, he mustered up his strength to tell the paramedic he was poisoned by Rowena. Sadly, those were his last words. He died shortly after. A police investigation was conducted, and upon discovery, they discovered huge amounts of pesticide used to kill scorpions and fire ants. Even more than that, she had a backup plan just in case Herman survived the biscuits. She also laced his medication with poison and left a trail of evidence behind her. She was arrested upon discovery. In 2003, Rowena was found guilty of first-degree murder. However, the story doesn't end there. Now this is some funny shit. Rowena died a horrible death in her jail cell. The cause of death? She choked on a dinner roll and died slowly according to reports. Poetic justice? I say yes. I hope she's still choking all the way to hell.